All right, everybody, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jessie Wales. I am one of 3 community engagement coordinators for the One Lagoon program, which is part of the Indian River Lagoon Council. You can learn more about One Lagoon at our website, onelagoon.org, and learn more about everything that we're working on as far as projects. Now, we get funding that comes in from the EPA that we give out annually to different projects across the lagoon. And today I am really excited to announce that we are going to hear from one of my favorite projects, and maybe a little bit biased, the Shuck and Share program. So Shuck and Share has been funded by the NEP for almost 10 years now, I think. And we're going to hear all about its history from its newest director, Tess Sailor-Tynes. So Tess is a graduate of Rollins College. She graduated in 2017 with a degree in environmental studies. And from there, she joined the Marine Discovery Center staff in New Smyrna Beach as a lead camp counselor. I remember the first day she came in, she was wearing chacos and had her Nalgene bottle and a backpack. And we were like, that's the one. She's going to be part of the staff for sure. In the fall of that year, she was hired on to be the conservation science specialist, working on grant responsibilities such as managing the Shuck and Share oyster recycling program, recruiting volunteers to assist with MDC's mission, citizen science, shoreline restoration, mangroves, kayaking, boat tours, just an all-around jack of all trades. She did a little bit of everything. So through the years, Tess has worked with research partners and habitat managers to practice science-based conservation work in the Indian River Lagoon watersheds. Today, she is the Conservation Science Coordinator at Marine Discovery Center and has experienced the growth of Shuck and Share across the state of Florida. Even as restoration practices have shifted, Tess has continued to be inspired by what has remained constant within the Shuck and Share program, which is community. And I think that's what she's going to be focusing on today. So Tess, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you for that awesome introduction. I'm just gonna get my screen share going here and hope that it works for me. All right. Let's see here. Okay, so can everyone see the presentation here?
Yes, we are good.
Awesome. So thank you, Jessie, and thank you to the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program for having me today. This work, of course, would not be possible without you guys, but of course, all of the community partners, and that's kind of what I hope to dive into today. So I'd like to take this time to kind of acknowledge not only you guys, but all of the partners that have been involved with Shuck and Share, and of course, those who continue to support the program throughout the years. So first, I wanted to give a little bit of a background into Marine Discovery Center. You gave a little bit of kind of what we do in regards to the Indian River Lagoon, but essentially we are the host site of the Shuck and Share Oyster Recycling Program, and we are a 501c3 nonprofit, and we do focus on the protection and conservation of the Indian River Lagoon, and we do that through 3 main pillars, which are education, restoration, and exploration. We were established back in 1997, and we actually reside in the northernmost part of the Indian River Lagoon. You can kind of see via the map there that we are pretty darn close to the Ponce de Leon Inlet. And of course, that watershed boundary in terms of management has expanded, but in terms of, hubs of education and restoration, we're kind of up there in the north. Our campus is 22 acres of the former New Smyrna Beach High School. But since we moved there back in 2012, we've actually done a lot of rewilding of the property, such as converting 5 acres of what used to be track and field into functioning salt marsh habitat. We've created a living shoreline demonstration area that's not only for practitioners, but also for residents who might be interested in replacing those seawalls that are, required by their insurance companies. And we've, of course, established the Shuck and Share oyster recycling program. So Shuck and Share began in the fall of 2013 and was actually funded and managed by the governing board of the St. Johns River Water Management District. There was this huge demand in oyster material after we recognized that there were these continuous declines in natural oyster reef populations, not only in the IRL, but also across the globe. Those numbers are pretty stark. We're talking 83% plus, I believe. The partnership actually continued under the IRL Council after its establishment in 2015. So that's where you guys come in. And we've received funding from multiple funding sources, but IRL Council has been one of our main supporters. Now, we're going to kind of go through the historical chronology of Shuck and Share and where we started and where we are now. In that first year, I think it's pretty incredible that with the beginning of a new program, we had 700 volunteers that dedicated over 2,300 hours to the program. Community, relationships are at the base of what we do. And they included anything from residents to University of Central Florida as a research partner, Waste Pro, Brevard Zoo, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, or FWC, and plenty more that will hopefully be acknowledged through the rest of the presentation. So not everybody kind of understands the process of oyster recycling. You know, a lot of people understand other recycling, so your metals, your plastics, your cardboard, all of that. But oyster recycling is quite a bit different. And so I'm going to run through kind of what the process looks like for us. So after approaching restaurants that are willing to be a part of our awesome network, we collect these oyster shells on a weekly basis. And this collection happens either via an MDC volunteer, but we also receive collection assistance from Waste Pro, who is our local waste management company. They pick up from the larger contributing restaurants who sometimes have 2,000 plus pounds of shell to donate weekly. So, shout out to Waste Pro. We'll talk a little bit about that effort later. Once collected, the shells do come back to Marine Discovery Center. Once again, I mentioned that we were the former site of the New Smyrna Beach High School. And we have this awesome back parking lot that used to be the driver's permit lot of the high school. So once the shells come back to our campus, they actually go into that lot where they are marked in monthly piles. This ensures that they go through a quarantine process. And this standard was actually set once, enough oyster recycling programs started popping up. They realized that, hey, it's probably a good idea to cure these shells to ensure that bacteria from other states or elsewhere don't get into the waterways that we're going to eventually be putting them into. So our shells sit for about 6 months. Sometimes it's more like 6 to 12, depending on how long the actual restoration materials are sitting there until they're ready to be taken to the sites. But after the shells are cured, they're then ready to be put into those restoration units. And this looks like a multitude of things, depending on the format that we're interested in for the restoration itself. We look to, our research partners, our permitting agencies, et cetera, to kind of help us understand what's going to drive those units or those materials. Once these materials have been created, they can then be transported, right? So we're mainly working on Marine Discovery Center's campus, and that's not where we do our main restoration. We're working, in the Indian River Lagoon and sometimes even across the state to ensure that these restoration practices are, successful. And so this can involve things, people like park staff, volunteers, and of course, the partnering organizations start to assist in this process as well, making sure that, hundreds to thousands of units get to where they need to be. And so from there, the deployments happen. So predetermined dates are kind of allowing us to work with not only the seasons of when we need to be working in, the tides, et cetera, but it also ensures that we can continue the volunteer participation to get the work done efficiently. So Once these units are in the waterway, not everybody knows about the wonderful ecosystem services that oysters can provide. So the oyster shell itself is going to provide a calcium carbonate substrate. And essentially, this is a signal to larval oysters. They're naturally attracted to those shells for recruitment, and they need to find somewhere to attach to in about 2 to 3 weeks of that larval stage. Once those larvae have settled on those oysters, they have, 3 to 5 years until they're going to be adult self-sustaining habitats. And so after that 3 to 5 year mark, we see a huge increase in the potential for these oysters to become those ecosystem, those keystone species that we know and love them to be. Our oysters here in the lagoon and surrounding watersheds typically filter anywhere from 25 to 50 gallons of water per day. So if you're, multiplying that by the amount of larvae that are settling on each oyster shell, we have a pretty significant impact from these restoration materials. So Shuck and Share was based on and continues to be because of continues to thrive and be successful because of community involvement. Once again, this is a kind of multi-level scenario where we have all sorts of community involvement happening. So the restaurants themselves or the businesses that involve themselves in Shuck and Share, whether it's restaurants or Waste Pro, they're pursuing a more sustainable practice through their business by getting involved in Shuck and Share. And then, down the road, they're eventually, ultimately supporting the restoration work that we do. And like I said, these are affecting habitats not only in the Indian River Lagoon, but also statewide. Volunteers, I'm going to talk a bit about them today because they spend a lot of time doing the work with us, right alongside us and supporting us, whether it be from the beginning of the program to now, but they're an invaluable resource that we're super lucky to have. Some of them can just be community members that are walking by a workshop one day and they have questions about what we're doing. Others have been involved since the start of the program, and they're crazy enough to come back, and we invite them with open arms. Sometimes we're inviting them with a promise of lunch afterwards. But we truly wouldn't be able to get this work done without them. Their efforts are recognized throughout Shuck and Share, whether it's from the oyster collection at the beginning of the Shuck and Share process, all the way to the unit creation events and the deployments. And then finally, of course, within our little tight-knit community, we have our research partners. These create space for the materials. They understand where these materials are going. They select the sites. They also handle permitting, how many materials are going out on each site, and then the monitoring for the restoration work, which is a huge aspect in the world of the restoration that we do. Skip forward. Sorry about that. So Waste Pro, it makes me smile. We hit a huge milestone this year, and Waste Pro has been a big part of that. They were gracious enough to be one of our very first community partners in the Shuck and Share program. So typically when we're approaching restaurants, we are providing them with 5-gallon buckets that are sealed to make sure that we are, within health code regulations, and we're making sure that it's easy for the restaurants to be a part of our program. But there are some restaurants, as I mentioned, that can contribute thousands of pounds of oyster shells each week. So what you see here is you see the Waste Pro truck. Now, the Waste Pro truck was just a regular pickup truck at first. They did not have kind of the technology to effectively collect those large, heavy bins. And these are 96-gallon bins. These are the same ones that you pull to your curb every couple of days for that waste collection. So after joining forces with Shuck and Share, they actually outfitted their truck to ensure that this could be a safe, effective, and efficient process for their drivers. And they wanted to make sure that there was, a good way for them to get those shells from the restaurants, from those larger contributors, and get them all the way back to MDC. And so what you see here is they installed these rails on the side of their trucks, as well as a lift gate to make it easier for their drivers. So, I think it's important to note that WastePro didn't have to do this, and yet they were committed to kind of this more sustainable business figure, and we are, eternally grateful. Just to give kind of an update on where they are to date, their partnership has contributed over 766,000 pounds of oyster shells, and because we've hit this big milestone, they're also the winner of the 2024 Rhizophora Conservation Award that Marine Discovery Center gives out to a conservation hero each year. So big shout out to WastePro. There's just some cool efforts. We talk to people who have adopted the Shuck and Share program, and not every waste management company is willing to contribute in this way. So hopefully we give them the applause that they deserve. So a little bit of background, right? We started in 2013. We started collecting in 2014. We were kind of on a good track of creating materials. We knew what our community looked like. That community continued to show up for us. But around the world, 2020 was a shocking year that changed the way that we lived and worked. And we were no exception to that. So though we spend lots of time in the field doing conservation work, so we're outside a lot, there was a big question mark around the success and the future of the Shuck and Share program, being that it depended on restaurants that were now, having to follow the regulations that were set forth. And so this kind of challenged us to look at the program through a new lens. There were lots of changes being made in our partner restaurant network. Unfortunately, we did see full closures of restaurants, or just in general, fewer oyster sales. And then even managerial changes kind of created a challenge in how we communicated with the restaurants and made sure that we were supporting them how we could. Around the same time, though, there was also a major shift in restoration practices, and which materials were being used. So we had experimented with novel materials, but we decided to make an entire shift with our restoration partners, and move to non-plastic alternative materials. And so I'm going to give you guys a background of what we used to make. You guys might have been involved with workshops that created these materials, right? We have our traditional oyster materials here. We have our bags that were created with a Naltex diamond mesh. This is a marine grade plastic material that is UV resistant and doesn't leach chemicals into the waterway. So, positive for the use of plastic. Each bag was filled with about 30 pounds of cured oyster shells and then tied at each end. Bags are stacked along the shoreline and then tied together using zip ties. So it's one cohesive breakwater unit, and gaps for wildlife, that created, this living shoreline methodology. And then we also created the Naltex oyster mats. So these are the thicker square gauged material here on the right-hand side. We would create these mats by affixing anywhere from 30 to 36 oyster shells with a zip tie. And the materials were successful in both living shoreline stabilization and oyster reef restoration for larval oysters and increasing general habitat function. Our research partners monitor past restoration sites to ensure their continued success, but we have experienced changes in how these materials perform in certain areas. And we also, we're starting to do microplastics research. So the awareness about the materials that we were using was highlighted even more by the combination of these two things. So just to give you an example of the monitoring of past sites, sites that were once intertidal oyster reefs are now subtidal due to rising water levels. And so that means that the oysters can be predated by things that they're not usually, at risk to be predated by. They're no longer serving ecosystem services, and sometimes those oyster shells are completely dissolved off of the materials themselves. So in these cases, we will go back, we'll join our restoration partners, we will go back and remove these old materials from the sites, just because they're no longer serving a purpose, right? So whether it be changes in the environment or changes in our practices, we know that we need to kind of make the change accordingly. And so that's, what we started doing a few years ago. And so after researching non-plastic options, you guys might be familiar with these. It was decided that these galvanized wire bags, these were typically used in crab traps. These were most similar in function. So they're also volunteer friendly. The material is zinc dipped to resist corrosion for up to 5 years. The larger spacing that's in the material, we were optimistic that that would leave larger room for species recruitment and foraging. And then lastly, we could standardize the size and the weight of the bag to be similar to that of our traditional bags. So these were completely, non-plastic. We have the mesh itself, and then we would secure the loose ends with steel hog rings. But even that's changing. So after a few years of this material being applied in shoreline restoration practices, monitoring results indicated that these materials were actually degrading much quicker than we thought in our super highly saline environment. So we have very high salt content. So although we haven't really found another material, another alternative to work with, another kind of novel material for us, we have communicated with our restoration, manufacturers who manufacture the material themselves to kind of help them understand what kind of parameters we're looking for in our practices here in the Indian River Lagoon. And what we've noticed is this is actually a consistent thing, not only in our watershed, but also watersheds across the country and even across the world. It's something that we've noticed as we've gone to conferences and watched presentations and looked at the results of different scientific experiments. So when we're switching over to oyster reef application, we found the bees mats, bees elements. These are a company from the Netherlands, and they create this bioplastic that is formulated from potato chip starch waste. So they combine this potato chip waste with another biopolymer to create these awesome little mats that you see here. The mats have these peaks and valleys, as well as beads that allow two singular mats to be snapped together to create this more dynamic shape. We then use a stainless steel zip tie, which you can see a little bit here, just through the hole of that drilled oyster shell. And once again, we're attaching 30 to 36 oyster shells to each mat. Being that it's a scientific comparison, we want to make sure that we are similar in size and application so that we can compare it to our traditional materials. So that was kind of the scientific application of things, and the work that we've done to kind of shift to our alternatives. But one of the great things about having a Shuck and Share community that is, full of hardworking people is that we have a little bit of a competitive nature. And not all oyster recycling programs have this, but one of the things that we have is the idea to turn our unit making workshops into an Olympic sport. So each spring, MDC would actually create teams of volunteers. So whether it was UCF or Stetson University, corporate groups, other nonprofits, etc., we would battle it out to see who could create different amounts of units. So how many bags can you make in a certain amount of time? Fastest bag made. And then we would look to group events as well. And all of these points combine to eventually win the beloved oyster trophy. The verdict is still out on who's the reigning champion, but the trophy's in my office at MDC. So if that tells you anything, hopefully you know who the winner is. Of course, we are kind of a social community. 10 years into the program, the operations are generally straightforward, but one of the things that we haven't talked about yet is the accessibility to learning about Shuck and Share and its community of partners. So Shuck and Share followed the general protocols of other recycling programs across the country and across the world. But now we've actually created a framework that creates an easy decision to join our network if you're, in the state of Florida. When we're working to onboard more restaurants into the program, or when an organization somewhere else in Florida is interested in establishing their own chapter of Shuck and Share, it's important to us to have somewhere to guide them. So shuckandshare.org has provided a mutual benefit scenario where both the program and the partners are able to represent themselves in a cohesive community of practice. It's pretty impressive to see the number of restaurants and organizations or agencies across the state that are involved with Shuck and Share. And I definitely recommend you check out shuckandshare.org. It'll kind of help you understand how widespread we are in our efforts. There have been unexpected connections that have come forth from creating this program. Starting something like an oyster recycling program can seem really daunting, but one of the most beautiful things that I've witnessed is seeing how much people really care. People who may not even be in the direct network of Shuck and Share. So it takes our community to continue the work that we do, but there's this incredible ripple effect from that. We've been able to open our connections to those outside of New Smyrna Beach and even outside of Florida. Now, it's important to note, all of these news stories and things are very exciting. We don't do the work for the pats on the back. We know we're making a positive impact on both people and our ecosystems, but it's always nice to be acknowledged, right? This kind of exposure not only honors the work that we do, but also all of the people that have given time, funds, or even ideas to help advance the program. These are just some examples of that. Years back, we were approached by Proud Pour, which is a wine company that focuses on donating proceeds to certain habitat restoration efforts. We've also been invited to attend seafood festivals and help divert their discarded oyster shells from the landfill. And additionally, we've been fortunate enough to be featured alongside our partners in various publications that highlight the Shuck and Share program. So the lesson learned here is nurture your network. We know that we have a really good one and we want to make sure that they know that. So where does Shuck and Share stand today? As I mentioned, we just hit a really big milestone. We've recycled over 1 million pounds of oyster shells just in Volusia County. Statewide, I really need to get an updated number on that. But millions and millions of pounds across the state of Florida from our different Shuck and Share partners. We have over 7,210 volunteers from the community that have collectively donated over 15,000 hours of their time to the Shuck and Share program alone. So aside from all the other programs that I do and my coworkers do at Marine Discovery Center, this is just Shuck and Share, which is pretty incredible. And then finally, the habitat value. We've had thousands of feet of shoreline and acres of oyster reefs that have been restored to increase habitat function and, of course, support the incredible biodiversity of the Indian River Lagoon. With that, I'd like to thank Annie Roddenberry, who started the Shuck and Share program way back when. I don't mean to, make it sound like it's been a long time, but 10 years. Jesse Wales, of course, my predecessor, for leading such a wonderful program. You guys have both, been able to lead this program in such a way that's had an incredible impact on the work that we do. And lastly, thank you to our funding agencies for continuing to support this program. And then our community for supporting Shuck and Share and the efforts of conserving the Indian River Lagoon. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tess. That was fantastic. What a cool overview. Everything that you guys have been working on.
Yeah.
So we did get a couple of questions in the chat if you have some time to answer. So
Absolutely.
one of our attendees is curious about how Waste Pro was brought on. So they know that MDC recently awarded them for their work at the Shore Symposium last week. And they see that Waste Pro has been and maybe still is involved with oyster shells in Apalachicola. But do you know exactly how that partnership got started?
So when it comes to other chapters of Shuck and Share, we share our marketing materials, we share our protocols with chapters who are interested in establishing themselves around Florida. They are also made aware that we do partner with Waste Pro as a waste management team. But essentially, Waste Pro was, contacted at the beginning of the program because we had this insurmountable issue of we can only pick up so many 5-gallon buckets of oyster shells with 1 or 2 volunteers each week. And so for those larger contributors, we decided to kind of make this contact with Waste Pro. Now, of course, there are benefits from this in-kind match. They're able to kind of provide that community aspect from the business side of things. But yeah, they've been on since the beginning of the program. Each looks a little different, right? They only have a certain range that they can pick up from, and that's completely understandable. But for the most part, they've had a significant contribution to our program.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Can you tell us your favorite experience or story with the Shuck and Share program?
Oh, that's so hard. Yeah. Um, you know, um, as much as I love the wildlife, it's kind of obvious. I think all of us are here for that reason. It's why we have the Shuck and Share program in the first place. But I think Oyster Olympics. I think I had to put that in there because definitely one of the most competitive situations we've ever been in, whether it be between us and Dr. Walters or just the day itself. That was one of my favorite things that I hope to bring back someday. Yeah, it's definitely a lot of fun. I think as a former athlete, I really appreciate the Oyster Olympics.
Be gunning for that trophy next time.
I know. Like I said, it's sitting on my desk because we were the winners. So
Um, is Shuck and Share open for new restaurants to sustainably give oyster shells to MDC?
yeah, absolutely. The starting of getting a new restaurant on board looks a little differently each time, and that's perfectly okay. Usually, a conversation is had with myself or with Julia, who is our conservation science specialist, who kind of oversees the program. And yeah, depending on what county we're in, we can look to see who your representative would be, who's coordinating that program in that area, and we can kind of make the network happen from there.
Awesome. So
Yeah,
sticking with the theme of restaurants, do you think that the restaurants use the fact that they participate in Shuck and Share as a point of pride or a piece of marketing?
absolutely. So, I was only able to share a little screen cap of our website, but many of us have been in the restaurant world. We want to make it as easy as possible for restaurants to approach the Shuck and Share program. And sometimes we're lucky enough that that is a point of pride for them. Some restaurants, unfortunately, are not interested, but that's okay. We'll focus on the ones that are. Um, and we make sure to nurture that. So whether it's through marketing materials that we can share with them, like window stickers, or the actual marketing on shuckandshare.org, we make sure that marketing happens. And if they choose to use it, great. I love that.
Do the restaurants get any sort of recognition from MDC or Shuck and Share for their participation?
Yeah, so there's some both internal and kind of public acknowledgement that we give them. Like I said, we kind of give them pens or coasters or stickers that they can use to kind of say, hey, we're a sustainable restaurant by choosing to be involved with Shuck and Share. We also make sure that they know their annual contributions. So around the holiday time, we go and give them kind of gratitude pieces. So that's usually a note and something along with it, like a painted oyster shell, to say, thank you for being involved, and we hope to continue the relationship.
I love that.
Yeah.
What other types of projects does MDC lead in the community, and how can citizens get involved?
Yeah. So, it was hard, kind of pinpointing Shuck and Share because it's just, one piece of what we do, but being, like I said, that it's such a monumental year for the program, it was kind of easy to come up with the slides as I went on. But MDC is an incredible organization among many in the lagoon. We have our exploration programs that are kayak and boat tours that go out every day. There are education programs from school holiday camps all the way to summer camps. All of this information and the contact information for each department can be found on our website. Everything is bookable through there as well. So whether you're visiting or you live here and you haven't been, I definitely recommend it. We're free and open to the public, and like I said, we have 22 acres, and it's a nice place to come walk, see a rocket launch, walk your dog. So hopefully this will bring awareness to MDC as well.
Nice. How many organisms do you think live on a live oyster reef? And
Ooh.
what's the coolest creature that you've seen?
Um, you know, Unfortunately, so I've seen a lot of cool creatures. Okay, so I'll go with the first question first. So organisms living on an oyster reef. It depends where you are, right? A reef in the northern Indian River Lagoon is going to be an intertidal oyster reef, and so our biodiversity might look a little different than, say, an oyster reef that's subtidal down in Brevard County. So whether it's aquatic organisms or terrestrial organisms that are using that oyster reef, that biodiversity is accounted for by folks like our research partners, who can understand that there's this significant impact on more organisms than just the oysters. If I had to guess on a single oyster reef between the plankton and the crustaceans and the fish and the birds, I would say 1,000 plus easily.
Yeah,
Yeah, like I said, with those intertidal reefs, it's a little bit hard. I wish I could sit and watch all the animals come forage each day, but and then on the what was the second question? Remind me what the second question was.
the coolest was one that
Oh, the coolest one.
messed that
I
up.
mean,
Coolest one.
being, that we're in the water, we either see things swim by. So we've seen little sea hares swim by. Those are always really cool. I never get tired of seeing the dolphins come up. Sometimes they're super curious about what we're doing, them and the manatees. I've seen slugs. I've seen, the seagrass resurgence in our area, which has been really cool. Unfortunately, some of the sponges that have taken over some of our oyster reef materials that are now subtidal are vibrant and really pretty in color, and it's really interesting to learn about kind of their optimal scenarios. So I don't know, it's a very loaded question for me. I love seeing all the different animals because it's just an indicator for how biodiverse we are. It's awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then we have one last question. We're
Sure.
bringing it back to the Oyster Olympics.
Okay.
You describe the coveted trophy for us. What are we
Oh,
missing out on?
oh yes. So our lovely, how do I say this in such a dramatic way? So our restoration partners with University of Central Florida have a son who is also an athletic child. And what to do with all those, trophies that you've won over the year for being such a fantastic athlete, but to reuse them. And so what we did is we removed his name off of the plaque of the trophy. Um, and then we stuck an oyster on there that was painted gold. And then we drilled and painted oysters, of course, silver and bronze, for the second and third place teams as well. And then I believe we even tied the top with a little bit of bagging mesh.
I think so, yeah.
Just, yeah, just a cherry on top. So it's a combination of things, but yes, it is very coveted, and yeah, you can't have it.
Well, that is a perfect way to end this. Tess, thank you so much for coming on today. We really appreciate it. If you guys have any follow-up questions for Tess, please feel free to message her. You can see her email is on the screen. If you have any questions for us, please reach out to us on onelagoon.org, and we will see you guys next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you guys.